I never believed in destiny. My life was measured in contracts, not prophecies. A name on a sheet of paper, a price beside it, and my job was to deliver, dead or alive. It was clean in its own way, cold, efficient, profitable. And that was my life. I am Gavin Holt, a bounty hunter drifting from one corner of the world to the next. But that night, as the rain clung to the window of a smoke-filled tavern in Rome, destiny found me anyway. The man who sat across from me was no ordinary client. His coat was too fine, his shoes too polished, and his eyes carried the stillness of a man who did not fear consequence. He introduced himself only as Elias Crane. He spoke in a voice that was calm, deliberate, the kind of voice that belonged to someone used to being obeyed. "I have a contract," he said, "one unlike any you have taken before." I told him I was not interested. I had earned enough to vanish from this life. One more job was not worth the risk. Elias did not argue. He simply slid a leather folder across the table. Inside was a photograph, the entrance to a sealed chamber beneath the Vatican. A single line of text lay beneath it. Codex of the Second Revelation. "You want me to steal from the Vatican," I said flatly. He nodded once. "A manuscript buried in their secret archives. It is older than empires, older than Rome itself. The church hides it because it speaks of a power that rivals their God." I laughed, though the sound felt hollow in my throat. I had chased men across continents, fought killers in back alleys, and slipped away from governments that wanted me in chains. But the Vatican was different. Its walls were not stone. They were built of centuries of silence, guarded by soldiers who served both heaven and earth. "You are asking me to walk into the lion's mouth," I said, "and I am offering you the lion's treasure." He pushed a slip of paper forward. A number was written on it, more than I could earn in a year of blood and bullets, more than enough to disappear forever. I told him no. He did not look surprised. He simply leaned back, eyes never leaving mine. "Do you know what is written in the Second Revelation?" he asked. "It speaks of a figure not of heaven, not of earth, but of both. A being that will rise when the world forgets its fear. The Vatican does not guard it to protect humanity. They keep it because they believe they can control it." I felt a coldness settle in my chest. His words were too precise, too rehearsed to be lies. And something in me, the part that had seen men burn villages for gold, that had watched governments trade lives for silence, told me he was not exaggerating. I left him there, in the tavern's dim light, certain that I would never see him again. But his words followed me into the night. The rain clung to the streets, washing the alleys clean, yet I could not shake the thought. A manuscript that promised another God, a church that hid it, and a client willing to pay me more than I had ever dreamed to bring it out into the open. I told myself I would refuse. I told myself I was done. But when I closed my eyes, I remembered the faces of men I had delivered to prisons, to graves, to fates worse than either. Each of them thought they were untouchable until I arrived. If I could bring them down, why not the walls of Rome? By dawn, I had made my decision. I returned to the tavern the next evening. Elias Crane was waiting, as if he had known I would come. "You're in," he said simply. I did not answer. I took the folder, weighed its silence in my hands, and nodded once. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that belonged to a man who had just placed a piece on a chessboard. "This will be your last contract, Mr. Holt. Completed, and you may walk away forever." I told myself I accepted for the money. That was the lie I carried with me as I stepped into the Roman night. But deep down, in the place I never admitted to anyone, I knew the truth. It was not greed that pulled me into the Vatican's shadows. It was the need to know what the Second Revelation whispered, and whether the world could survive if its words were ever spoken aloud. The Vatican had always been a fortress. but I had never seen it through the eyes of a thief until now. From the outside, tourists snapped photographs of white stone walls and golden domes. They admired the saints carved into marble and the guards in striped uniforms who looked more like ornaments than soldiers. But I knew better. Behind the painted smiles of history, the Vatican was a prison of secrets. Its archives stretched deeper than cathedrals, built with stone that had swallowed centuries. I had heard whispers among mercenaries, men who claimed the Vatican's vaults were guarded not only by soldiers, but by shadows older than Rome. I laughed at those stories once. I did not laugh now. I spent days studying its routines. Guards rotated in careful patterns, eyes sharp, rifles sharper. At midnight, the corridors of the Apostolic Palace grew quiet, but never silent. A lamp always burned, a lock always turned, a boot always struck stone. Elias Crane had given me blueprints, though I suspected they were incomplete. His map ended at a sealed stairwell beneath the Apostolic Library. Beyond that, nothing. Either he did not know, or he wanted me to walk blind. So I made my own plan. The roofline above the library had a gap between cameras, a seam barely 2 meters wide. If I could slip through it, I could descend into the archives undetected. On the night I chose, the moon hung low, veiled by clouds that moved like ghosts. I scaled the outer wall with the ease of a man who had done this too many times, though each heartbeat pounded like a drum. My gloves scraped against cold stone, and for a moment I thought I heard whispers riding the wind, Latin syllables too faint to be real. Inside, the air changed. The Vatican did not smell of incense here. It smelled of dust, of parchment, of old stone that had not tasted sunlight in centuries. I moved through corridors lined with books taller than men. Gold-leaf spines gleamed faintly under the dim lamps. Each step echoed like a confession. The stairwell Elias had marked lay behind an iron gate. The lock was old, but not weak. It resisted my tools longer than it should have. When it finally clicked, the sound rang too loud in the silence. I froze. Somewhere beyond the shelves, a door creaked. Footsteps followed, slow, deliberate, measured. I slid into the shadows, pressing myself against the spine of the wall. My breathing slowed until my chest barely moved. A lantern glow appeared. It swayed gently, held by a man in a dark robe. His hair was white, his back bent, yet his eyes were sharp as glass. He was humming under his breath, a hymn I did not recognize. Brother Lucan, the custodian of these halls. He stopped near the gate, his lantern lifting. The beam touched the tools I had left glinting on the floor. My chest tightened. Lucan bent, fingers brushing the lockpick. His eyes narrowed. Slowly, he turned his head, scanning the shelves. For one heartbeat, his gaze passed over me. And in that breath I knew. If he saw me, my life ended here, in silence, buried beneath the Vatican. The hymn stopped. The lantern steadied. Lucan stood straighter than his age should allow. His voice carried low but clear. "Is someone there?" My pulse thundered. Every instinct screamed to run, but running meant sound, and sound meant death. I held my breath until my vision blurred. Lucan lingered a moment longer, then lowered his lantern. He muttered a prayer, slid the tools into his pocket, and shuffled away, vanishing into the dark. Only then did I move. The iron gate groaned open, and I descended into the stairwell. Each step downward felt heavier, as if the air itself resisted me. Stone walls closed in, damp and ancient. At the bottom, a single door waited. Carved into its face was a seal I did not recognize, 2 circles interlocked, bound by a line of script so old it seemed alive. I touched the door, and a chill spread through my hand. For a moment, I thought of Elias Crane's words. The church does not guard it to protect humanity. They keep it because they believe they can control it. I wondered then if I had stepped into something no man should ever touch, and as the silence deepened, I realized this was only the beginning. I tried to bury the offer under the weight of routine. I kept telling myself it was too dangerous, that no sum of money was worth ending up in chains or in a coffin beneath Vatican stone. But the more I tried to forget Elias Crane and his talk of the second revelation, the more it lingered. The Vatican was not just another fortress. It was the last wall between mankind and something that even the church feared. And whether Elias was lying or not, his words had scratched a mark in me that I could not erase. I decided to walk away. I sent a message to the contact number Elias had left, curt and final. The job was off. For a day, there was silence. I almost believed I was free. Then, at dusk, the silence ended. A man was waiting for me outside the apartment I used as a safe house. He leaned against the alley wall with the casual air of someone who knew exactly where I would be. His coat was dark, his boots muddy, and when he straightened, I noticed the way his hand never strayed far from the weapon at his hip. "You must be Holt," he said. His voice was smooth, confident, as if he were greeting an equal. "Name's Victor Ward. I work with the Circle." I did not need to ask which circle he meant. The way he said it, calm and certain, told me enough. The Obsidian Circle. "You sent Crane to do your talking," I said. "Crane opens doors," Ward replied. "I keep them from closing on your neck." He produced an envelope and tossed it toward me. Inside was another slip of paper, this one bearing a figure twice as large as the one Elias had offered. "Double," Ward said simply. "Enough to buy yourself an island if you want it." I stared at the number, but the promise of gold was not what tightened my grip on the page. It was the certainty in his eyes. He believed this was more than money. "What makes you think I would risk my life for this?" I asked. Ward's expression sharpened. "Because it is no longer about your life, Holt. It is about everyone else's. The second revelation is not a myth. It is a weapon disguised as scripture, and the Vatican is not protecting it. They are preparing to use it." He stepped closer, lowering his voice until it was nearly a whisper. "Imagine another God, Holt, not the one they preach from pulpits, but one born of earth and heaven both. Imagine what the church could do if they raised such a being to their throne. The world would not stand against them." I felt the chill of his words seep into my bones. He was persuasive, too persuasive. But his calm carried the weight of conviction, not deceit. "I walk into those walls again, and I do not walk out," I said. Ward's lips curved into a thin smile. "Not alone, you will not. I will be with you. I know their patterns, their blind spots, the cracks in their armor. You needed a partner, Holt. Now you have one." The way he said it, I almost believed him. Almost. He extended his hand. His grip was firm, steady, the grip of a soldier who had stood in the fire before and did not fear the flames. "Think of it this way," Ward said. "One last hunt. But this time, the prey is not a man. It is the truth itself. And you and I, we get to decide who holds it." I should have walked away. I should have torn the paper in half and left him in that alley. But something in me, the part that had spent too long chasing shadows across borders, recognized the fire in his words. If the second revelation was real, if it promised another God, then walking away did not save me. It only delayed the inevitable. I met his gaze and nodded once. Victor Ward smiled, and in that moment he looked less like a stranger and more like the kind of ally I had always trusted. Calm, capable, and reliable. The kind of ally who made you believe you could survive anything until the moment you realized you were wrong. The Vatican by day was a kingdom of pilgrims, tourists, and priests. By night it became something else entirely, an empire of stone and silence. That silence was what Victor and I stepped into. We moved like ghosts across rooftops slick with dew, shadows stitched to shadows. Victor was good, better than I expected. His boots never scraped stone, his breath never rose above a whisper. He had the calm of a man who had walked into fire before and returned untouched. At the edge of the apostolic library, he raised his hand and pointed. 2 guards stood at a side entrance, rifles slung, their eyes scanning the courtyard. Victor produced a small device no larger than a cigarette case. He pressed it once. Across the yard, a light flared to life in a separate wing. The guards turned, muttered to each other, and walked off to investigate. He gave me a thin smile. Their eyes can only follow one fire at a time. We slipped through the door before their footsteps faded. Inside, the air smelled of ink and dust, ancient pages steeped in centuries. I remembered my first attempt alone, the sound of Brother Lucan's hymn cutting the silence. I had been a shadow on the verge of collapse. Now I had Ward at my side, and I hated to admit it, but his presence steadied me. We moved deeper, past shelves that rose like walls, past tomes bound in cracked leather. Our footsteps echoed faintly, but no alarm stirred. Ward's map led us to the stairwell I had barely breached before. The iron gate loomed, its lock replaced since my first attempt. I crouched, tools ready, but Ward stopped me. He produced a small key from his pocket, slid it into the lock, and turned it without resistance. The gate opened with a sigh. I gave him a sharp look. "Where did you get that?" He shrugged. "The circle has long arms. Sometimes all you need is the right coin in the right hand." His calm answer carried a weight I did not like. But the stairwell yawned before us, and hesitation meant failure. We descended together. The walls grew damp, the air heavy. Lamps flickered as though resisting our intrusion. At the bottom, another door waited, its surface carved with symbols like interlocking serpents, the script older than Rome. Ward pressed his palm against it. "This is it." The stone groaned, then parted. The chamber beyond was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow. Rows of iron shelves stretched into darkness, each crammed with scrolls, tablets, codices bound in strange hides. It was a graveyard of knowledge, and in the center stood a single pedestal. Upon it lay a thick ledger bound in blackened leather. I felt the weight of it from across the room. We approached slowly, boots crunching on ancient dust. My chest tightened with every step. The Vatican called these the Secret Archives, but this place was something else. This was a vault, a prison built to bury truths too dangerous to breathe. Ward's voice dropped. "The Index of Shadows." I stared at the ledger. "What is it?" "The catalog," he said. "Every forbidden work the Vatican has hidden, every page erased from the world, and somewhere in its lines, second revelation." I reached for the book. The leather was cold, colder than stone. Symbols etched across its cover writhed faintly under the lamplight, as though alive. I opened it. The pages inside were filled with names, some in Latin, others in tongues I did not recognize. Each entry bore a sigil beside it, a mark of secrecy. Some were familiar, lost gospels, apocrypha whispered in rumor. Others chilled me, grimoires of forgotten kings, script said to have been written before the flood. And then I saw it. Codex Revelationis II, marked not with a sigil, but with a circle of ink darker than blood. Ward leaned close, his voice almost reverent. "There, proof it exists." The sound of footsteps shattered the silence, so we froze. Lantern lights spilled across the shelves. Brother Lucan again, his hymn echoing like a dirge. His eyes narrowed as the beam swept across the chamber and landed on us. He inhaled sharply, ready to shout. Ward moved before I could think. A flick of his wrist and the lantern crashed to the ground. Darkness swallowed the chamber. Lucan cried out, blinded. "Go!" Ward barked. We bolted up the stairwell. The index clutched tight against my chest. Behind us, Lucan's cries rang through the archives, joined by the thunder of alarm bells. By the time we reached the surface, the Vatican was awake. Guards poured into the halls, their rifles raised, their boots striking in rhythm. We ran through the labyrinth of stone and scripture, shadows chasing us like hounds. Ward's pistol barked once, scattering a squad that blocked our path. I struck another down with the butt of my weapon. The night swallowed us as we burst through a service door, alarms still howling. We vanished into the alleys of Rome, lungs burning, the index heavy in my grip. For a fleeting moment, I thought we had outrun death. But in truth, we had only stolen its name. The bells of the Vatican did not ring for prayer that night. They rang for blood. Their thunder shook the marble halls as Victor and I ran, the index of shadows heavy in my arms, boots pounded behind us, a chorus of steel and fury. Every shadow seemed to split open and spill soldiers armed with rifles, their faces hard, their orders sharper. Victor shoved me toward a stairwell. Down! We plunged into a narrow corridor lined with statues of saints. Their stone eyes followed us as though condemning our trespass. The air reeked of burning oil. Guards had lit torches to flush us from hiding. Left! Victor barked. He spun, fired 2 quick shots. A guard crumpled, his rifle clattering against the stone. I pushed forward, lungs burning, ears ringing with the echo of gunfire. A squad surged from the far end of the hall, blocking our way. Their commander shouted, and a storm of bullets ripped through the air. Shards of marble exploded around us, halos of stone dust forming where saints once stood proud. Victor lunged in front of me, dragging me behind a pillar. Bullets slammed into the column, splintering stone. He leaned out, firing back with calm precision, dropping one guard after another. "Keep moving," he growled. "I'll cover." We darted through an archway, stumbling into another hall. This one was lined with frescoes, scenes of judgment, of angels casting down sinners. For a heartbeat, I swore the painted eyes glowed with a light of their own. Another squad cut us off, rifles raised. Victor did not hesitate. He sprinted straight into the storm, his body a shield. A bullet tore across his shoulder, spinning him sideways. He staggered, teeth clenched, blood staining his coat. Instinct screamed at me to abandon him, to save myself, but I could not. He turned, eyes blazing, and fired through the pain, dropping 2 guards before collapsing against the wall. "Go!" he snarled through clenched teeth. "Get the index out!" For a moment, I believed him dead. His face was pale, his hand slick with blood as he pressed it to the wound. Yet his eyes burned with stubborn fire, daring me to move. I dragged him upright, throwing his arm across my shoulder. "We leave together." His weight slowed me, but it steadied me too. If he could bleed for this, I could carry him. We staggered through corridors that twisted like a labyrinth. Each turn brought another squad, another volley of bullets. My knuckles split as I struck down one soldier with the butt of my weapon, then another. The index felt heavier with every step, as if it wanted to stay buried. Finally, the outer cloister opened before us. Moonlight spilled across the courtyard, pale and cold. Freedom was within reach. A final squad surged forward, their rifles raised. Victor ripped free from me, stumbling into their fire. He raised his pistol with his uninjured arm and unleashed every round left in the chamber. Bullets cut the air like thunder. 3 guards fell before the rest dove for cover. Victor collapsed to one knee, his pistol empty, his breath ragged. He laughed through the blood on his lips. Not bad for a man who should be dead. I pulled him up again, fury and adrenaline carrying us across the courtyard. Alarms still howled, bells still thundered, but the shadows at the edges of the Vatican opened. A van waited, its lights cut, engine purring low. Figures inside waved us forward, the obsidian circles back up. We dove in just as another volley of bullets shattered the stone behind us. The doors slammed, the engine roared, and the Vatican's wall slipped into the distance. I pressed Victor against the seat, tearing fabric to bind his wound. Blood seeped through my hands, but his grin never faltered. "Told you I would keep the doors from closing on your neck," he rasped. For the first time since meeting him, I almost smiled. Because in that moment, bleeding and unbowed, Victor Ward looked like more than an ally. He looked like a brother in arms, the kind of man you trusted not because you had to, but because he had earned it. The van left us in silence, the hum of the engine fading into the Roman night. Victor leaned heavily on my shoulder, his coat drenched in blood, but his grin had not faded. The men of the circle guided us through crumbling streets until the shape of an abandoned church rose before us. Its steeple leaned like a broken spear, and its stained glass windows had long since shattered into teeth of jagged color. Lanterns burned inside, casting a dull orange glow across the ruined nave. Figures in dark coats stood like sentinels in the shadows, and at the center, framed by the skeletal remains of the altar, stood Magnus Vale. His silver hair glimmered like steel, his eyes blacker than obsidian. When we entered, his lips curved into a smile that was neither warm nor kind. "Mr. Holt," he said, "Victor, you have done more than I could have asked." The air in the sanctuary was heavy, thick with incense that had no business still burning here. I stepped forward, the index of shadows clutched under my arm. My chest still heaved from the chase, my knuckles raw, but the weight of the ledger had become more than just physical. It was a burden, a curse. I set it on the altar. The sound echoed like a gavel striking wood. Vale's eyes gleamed. He reached out, fingers caressing the blackened leather as though he were touching the very skin of God. "At last," he whispered, "the silence ends." But he did not open it. He did not need to. In his mind, the battle was already won. He straightened and looked at me with something like pity. "You carried it into the light, Mr. Holt. For that, I am grateful. But your part is finished." He turned his gaze to Victor. It was a glance, a subtle flicker of command. Victor's expression did not change. He simply drew his pistol. I had no time to speak, no time to move. The muzzle flared. Fire tore into my chest and the world tilted. The floor rushed up to meet me. My vision blurred, the cracked ceiling yawning above me like the mouth of a grave. I gasped, but breath would not come. Victor loomed above me, his gun steady, his eyes cold. Vale crouched beside me, his shadow blotting out the light. "You should be honored, Holt, to fall here at the birth of a new world. The church has smothered this truth for centuries, but we will set it free. A being neither of heaven nor earth, stronger than both. That is what they fear, and that is what I will release." My blood pooled across the stone. His words slid into me like knives, each syllable sharpening the edges of darkness. Victor aimed again. Vale rose, smiling as though he had just buried me, and as the world dimmed, I clung to one truth. I had been hunted my entire life, but a hunter never walks away without bringing a trap along. The church was silent, except for the rasp of my breath and the creak of Vale's boots as he circled the altar. Victor's pistol hovered above me, one more heartbeat from ending everything. Vale touched the index with reverence, his voice rich with triumph. "Centuries of silence undone by one man's greed. You carried fire into my hands, Holt, and now you will die in its shadow." He turned away, too certain of victory to even glance back. I coughed, blood on my lips, and forced a laugh. It came out raw, jagged, but it carried across the nave. "Vale," I said. My voice cut through the air, steady despite the pain. "Look again at what I brought you. See your revelation." The smile froze on his face. He spun, snatching up the ledger, and tore the leather ties loose. The chamber held its breath. The pages fell open. Not to prophecy, not to scripture, not to power, but to a crude drawing in bold ink, a raised middle finger scrawled with mocking defiance. The silence shattered. Laughter ripped from my throat, harsher than gunfire. "That is your second revelation, Vale. That is what you bled men for." The black calm that had cloaked him cracked apart. Rage boiled across his face, his composure disintegrating before his own followers. His hands trembled as he held the mockery aloft. The God he had promised, reduced to a child's insult. "You dare?" His voice broke with fury. "You dare mock me?" I pushed myself to my feet, slow but unshaken, tearing open my coat to reveal the dented vest beneath. The fabric was torn, bruises already blooming beneath, but it had stopped the bullet. "You should have checked your prize before celebrating," I said, stepping closer. "A hunter never hands over the kill so easily." The circle's men wavered. Their leader, once untouchable, now looked like a fool. Doubt spread through them like rot. Victor's pistol lowered an inch. His eyes darted between Vale and me, his certainty gone. Vale saw it. His fury turned to desperation. He lunged at Victor, seizing him by the collar. "Shoot him! Do it now! Prove your loyalty!" Victor froze. His finger hovered on the trigger, but his eyes betrayed him. The confidence he once wore like armor was gone, replaced by something raw, shame, hesitation. I pressed the moment, my voice cutting sharp. "This is your prophet? This is the man you follow? He cannot tell scripture from a joke. He promised you revelation, and all he holds is mockery." The circle's soldiers whispered among themselves. Their weapons faltered, their gazes uncertain. Vale roared, spittle flying. "Kill him!" But Victor did not move. The ruined doors exploded inward. Lantern light flooded the sanctuary. Vatican guards stormed in, rifles raised, crimson robes billowing. At their front strode Cardinal Aldrich, his eyes burning with command. "Seize them!" he thundered. Chaos ignited. Gunfire roared, steel clashed, and Vale's scream of rage was swallowed in the storm. And as the battlefield erupted, I stood tall, bruised but unbroken, the hunter's snare sprung. The ruined doors of the church crashed open, and the night poured in with steel and crimson. Vatican guards stormed across the threshold, rifles raised, their boots pounding in rhythm like a war drum. At their head strode Cardinal Aldrich, his scarlet robes trailing like a tide of blood. Father Corwin followed close behind, a heavy cross of iron gripped like a weapon. The circle reeled. Magnus Vale still clutched the false manuscript, his face twisted in fury and shame. His men hesitated, eyes darting between their humiliated master and the advancing soldiers. The air cracked with tension so thick it felt alive. Vale found his voice first. "Kill them all!" he roared. The circle erupted, guns flashing in the lantern glow. Vatican rifles answered with thunder. Bullets tore into stone and bone alike. The ruined church became a crucible of smoke, fire, and screams. I dove behind a fallen column, the index still pressed tight to my chest. Splinters rained down as rounds shredded the altar. Victor slid beside me, his pistol drawn. His face was pale, caught between rage and doubt. He opened his mouth, but I cut him off with a glare. "You had your chance," I snarled. "Now you pick a side." His jaw tightened. He lifted his weapon and fired into the chaos, not at me, not at the Vatican, but at the circle's men pressing in. One fell, then another. The betrayal cut both ways. Vale screamed when he saw it. "Traitor!" His voice cracked with hate. "I raised you, Ward. You owe me everything." Victor fired again, his face unreadable. "I owe you nothing." The battlefield split. Vatican forces pressed from the doors. The circle fought from the shadows, and I was trapped in the middle, hunted by both. Bullets shrieked past. A guard collapsed beside me, his blood seeping across the cracked marble floor. Across the hall, Father Corwin swung his iron cross, smashing a circle soldier to the ground before driving the edge into his throat. The priest's face was cold, merciless. Vale tried to rally his men, but the doubt from earlier still poisoned them. Every order he shouted sounded weaker than the last. Cardinal Aldrich's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Protect the thief," he thundered, his eyes locked on me. "He carries what must not be lost." For a heartbeat, I almost laughed. To the Vatican, I was no longer an intruder. I was the vessel of their secret, the unwilling guardian of balance. I scrambled from cover, firing as I moved, dragging Victor with me. We cut through the haze, heading toward the far side of the nave. The index throbbed like a curse in my hands, heavier with every step. Vale saw me. His face twisted into something monstrous. He raised his gun and bellowed my name. "Holt!" The shot rang out. Time slowed, but before the bullet could find me, a Vatican guard hurled himself into the path. He fell, blood spilling across the cracked tiles, his sacrifice silent but undeniable. I staggered, rage burning through me. My pistol barked in return, driving Vale back into the shadows. The church was a furnace now, its walls trembling under the weight of violence. Smoke curled toward the broken ceiling, mingling with the pale light of the moon. Every heartbeat was survival. Victor grabbed my arm, dragging me toward a side aisle. "We need to move," but Aldrich's command still echoed in my ears. "Protect the thief. Protect me." The irony twisted in my gut. For years I had been the predator, the hunter who dealt in contracts and coin. Now I was the hunted, the one shielded by men who would die to keep me breathing, not because they cared, but because of what I carried. Vale's scream cut through the thunder. "The revelation belongs to us. No priest, no thief, no false shepherd will keep it from me." He lunged forward, his men surging with him. Vatican guards met them head-on, steel clashing in close quarters. The nave became a slaughterhouse. I ducked into the shadows, heart hammering, and for the first time, I felt the weight of choice pressing down. Both sides wanted the same thing. Both sides believed they alone could wield the truth. And I, Gavin Holt, a bounty hunter who had lived his life by contracts and coins, stood at the center, holding the one thing that could shatter them all. As Victor and I pushed deeper into the smoke, I realized the sanctuary was no longer broken by age. It was broken by us, by faith turned into fire, and in that fire something darker was being forged. The ruined church had become a furnace of fire and screams. Vatican guards and circle soldiers clashed across the nave, gunfire rattling the stone bones of the sanctuary. The air was thick with smoke, the acrid stench of powder burning my throat. I moved through the chaos like a man trapped between storms. Bullets sparked off marble, bodies fell and were trampled. Victor fought beside me, his face pale, his movements stiff from blood loss, but his gun still barked with stubborn defiance. Somewhere across the nave, Vale raged. His voice rose above the din, raw with fury. "The revelation belongs to me, to us. Not to liars in scarlet robes!" He fired wildly, his followers scattering. The mockery of the false manuscript still weighed on him like a curse. The prophet had been unmasked, and the faithful faltered. A shell struck a column, stone raining down. I dove behind the rubble, clutching the index of shadows to my chest. Its leather binding felt alive, pulsing with the weight of centuries. Victor slid beside me, reloading with trembling hands. "He is breaking," he muttered. I looked up. Vale was no longer commanding, no longer towering. He was cornered, snarling like a beast, his voice cracking as he spat venom at both sides. "You think the Vatican guards humanity?" he screamed. "No, they guard themselves. The second revelation is not buried to protect you. It is chained to preserve their throne. They fear the day it rises because it will sweep them aside." The circle's remaining men wavered. Some still fired. Others lowered their weapons, doubt hollowing their eyes. His words reached them, but not with the strength he intended. It was the desperation of a man bleeding power. I pushed myself up, shouting across the chamber, "You would unleash what no man can control. You would drown the world to crown yourself king." Vale's eyes locked on me, burning with hate. "Better drowned in truth than smothered in lies." He turned and fled toward the apse, his coat whipping like a shadow. 2 guards lunged to stop him. He shot one through the chest and struck the other with savage strength, his path breaking open like a wound. "Vale!" I roared, but my voice was drowned by thunder. Aldrich moved. The cardinal cut through the chaos like a blade, his robes shredded, his face streaked with soot and blood. Yet his eyes burned with something relentless. He carried no rifle, only a pistol, its steel gleaming under the trembling lantern light. Vale burst onto the altar steps, spinning to fire one last desperate volley. The bullet sparked off marble, one grazing Aldrich's shoulder. The cardinal did not falter. His voice cut through the storm, clear as a bell. "Enough!" He raised the pistol and fired once. The shot struck Vale square in the chest. His body lurched back, arms flailing, the manuscript of mockery slipping from his grip. He crashed against the altar, blood splattering across its stone face, before sliding to the ground in silence. The sanctuary seemed to exhale. The circle's soldiers froze. Some dropped their weapons, others fled into the smoke. Aldrich lowered the pistol, his hand trembling only after the deed was done. His eyes lingered on Vale's corpse, not with triumph, but with something heavier, weariness, perhaps, or regret. I stepped forward, my breath ragged, the index still clutched to my chest. For the first time since entering this war, I realized the truth. Neither side was clean. One sought to unleash chaos, the other to bind it in chains. And I stood in the middle, the unwilling keeper of balance. Victor limped to my side, his face pale as ash. He glanced at Vale's body, then at Aldrich, then at me. His lips moved as though to speak, but no words came. The fire in the nave dimmed. The smoke curled toward the broken rafters, carrying with it the last of Vale's fury. Cardinal Aldrich turned at last, his gaze falling on me. There was no smile, no mask of authority, only the tired eyes of a man who had chosen violence to preserve silence. "It is finished," he said. His voice carried the weight of centuries, but I knew as I met his gaze that nothing was finished, not for me, not for the world. Vale was gone, but the shadow he had clawed toward still lingered in the pages I held, and the question of who truly deserved to guard it remained. The gunfire had faded, but the echoes still haunted the ruined church. Smoke curled from shattered pillars, and the floor was slick with blood. The obsidian circle was broken. Vale lay sprawled against the altar, his silver hair matted with red, his ambitions silenced by a single bullet. I stood among the wreckage with the index of shadows pressed against my chest. Its weight had become unbearable, as if every secret chained within was clawing at me, begging to be loosed. Victor leaned against a column, clutching his wound, pale as marble. His eyes met mine, tired, regretful. We had both been used, pulled like pawns across a board neither of us understood. The Vatican soldiers gathered the wounded, their chants low, their rifles still smoking. Father Corwin moved like a grim shadow among them, blessing the dying with his iron cross. His lips murmured prayers, though his eyes remained as hard as stone. Then Cardinal Aldrich approached. His robes were torn, his face streaked with soot, but his posture was unshaken. He carried the air of a man who had walked through hell and found the strength to keep standing. His gaze fell on me, then on the index clutched in my hands. "It belongs to us," he said softly, "not because we desire it, but because only we can bear the burden of silence." I felt anger rise, hot and bitter. That is what Vale said too, that only he could carry the truth. And look where it brought him. Aldrich's eyes narrowed, but his voice remained calm. "Vale sought chaos. We seek order. The world cannot survive chaos, Holt. It has enough of that already." I stared at the ledger. In its pages was something older than empires, darker than faith, strong enough to bend nations if ever unleashed. For a fleeting moment, I imagined keeping it, vanishing into the shadows with it, letting no hand, priest or zealot, ever touch it again. But Vale's last words echoed in me. So did Elias Crane's promises. And I understood then. The index was not just a secret. It was a test. Whoever held it would always believe they were the one worthy to decide its fate, and in that moment I knew I was no better. I stepped forward, my boots scraping against the blood-stained stone. Slowly, I extended the ledger. Aldrich took it with both hands, his face grave, his eyes unreadable. He bowed his head once, as if in acknowledgement, not of victory but of necessity. "You have done what few men could," he said. "You looked into the abyss and chose restraint. For that, you will leave here alive." I gave a bitter smile. Alive, maybe, but never free. He said nothing. He only turned and handed the index to 2 guards, who locked it within a black case and carried it out into the night. The battle was over. The circle was ash. The Vatican still stood. But I was no victor, only a man who had been used by both sides and forced to choose which hand would chain the world. The dawn was breaking as I stepped out of the church. The streets of Rome stretched before me, quiet, the air heavy with smoke and incense. Behind me, the great doors groaned open once more. I turned my head. There stood Aldrich, framed in the light of the altar fire. His eyes followed me as I walked into the pale gold of morning. For the first time, his lips curved into the faintest of smiles, calm, assured, satisfied. It was the smile of a man who believed the order of the world had been preserved. But as I walked away, the weight of his smile pressed against my back like a brand. Because though I had left the index behind, its shadow had already carved itself into me, and I knew the world would never feel the same again.